Hey folks, Evil DM here. I'm back for another episode of Isles and Efreetis. This week we're going to be talking a little bit different. I know I promised something different the last time, but I got a request in from Bob, who emailed me to the address that comes across the screen during this video, about talking a little bit about vampires. Since we talked about clerics before in the past, he wanted me to follow up with one of the most ferocious foes a cleric can go against, or one of the foes that a cleric is good against, a vampire. So we're going to take a look at the vampire as it is in the Monster Manual on page 99. And then we're also going to look at a couple other things I found in Dragon Magazine that help supplement the vampire and give a little more shape to him, more than what the Monster Manual itself says. So let's just change the scene here for you. There we go. Now we got vampire. This is what it looks like in the Monster Manual. Obviously, we know we have an armor class of 1, hit dice 8+3, 25% chance in the layer, treasure type, number of attacks, 5 to 10, special attacks, energy drain. He can only be hit by +1 or better magical weapons. He's got magical resistance. He's intelligent, very much so. He's chaotic evil. He has no psionic abilities or defenses for that. So, the things I want to highlight here, other than what you can read, you can read obviously, is vampires. If a vampire scores a successful hit on an opponent, the power blow causes a 5 to 10 points of damage, and his powerful negative force drains 2 life energy levels from the victim, complete with corresponding loss in hit dice, ability level, and attack level. So each vampire attack, when he's hitting successfully, is going to be draining while he's attacking. So it's kind of like a vampire is slowly draining the life force out of you when he bites you or he attacks you, however you really want to describe it. Now, a vampire can turn into a gaseous mist at any time he really wants to escape and move around, but in that form you can't do much but just move around. So keep that in mind when you use that at-will ability. He is not affected by sleep or charm or hold spells at all. Poison or powerless does not bother him as well. And anything that's cold or electricity, he only takes 1/2 damage. And let's say you do get him down to 0 hit points. You hacking away, your group gets down with him to 0 hit points. He basically turns into a gaseous form, and he can hightail it away and try to get back to his coffin. And he has 12 turns to do that, in which he rests for 8 hours, and he reforms himself into a corporeal body. So he does regenerate 3 hit points per round. So he's pretty much regenerating the whole time you're attacking him. So you better be a high enough group to do it. This is your big bad. This is not something you're going to be throwing at level 1. Though there are lesser vampires, and we can talk about that a little bit later as we're going into this, but vampires do recoil from garlic, so the movie stereotypes or stereotropes here do apply to vampires in this game when it was written. So they recoil from strong garlic, the face of a mirror or a cross, or other holy symbols of a lawful good god, whatever deity, are presented. It'll deter it like in the movies, and you don't have to use that. You can use it if you want to. A lot of people like to stick to the tropes of the vampire because it's fun, and people will do that. Vampires also have the gaze ability. Now, when it comes to the gaze ability, they pretty much act as if they've been struck by a charm spell, which pretty much it is. It's a charm gaze. And the vampire will have the ability to, control you as if you're charmed to be his ally or not be his ally. And it doesn't really say that it could do one person at a time. It does. If the vampire gazes into a person's eyes, the vampire will have the effect of charming, with the victim subtracting 2 from the saving throw versus magic. Now, I've seen a couple DMs do it that anybody that's looking at the vampire and the vampire is doing the gaze, he could be looking at the group, but generally you should be doing it that he's only looking at one person at a time. Quite possibly when you're playing a vampire, you're going to want to not do a straight-on battle with a vampire. You're going to want to have him lurking in shadows at first. Maybe trying to get someone from the group alone when they're exploring or they're on guard duty at night. The vampire will creep up, use his charm ability first to see if he can get that person to like him and get him on his side. so he has somebody as an ally during battle. That's generally how I would do a vampire approach. Always try to get that party to split apart and get the vampire to befriend somebody with this charm spell, and boom, he is an instant ally when it comes to battle. And the group doesn't even have to realize it too, because you could have this person charmed and be like, all right, you're charmed by the vampire after he says some really elegant words to you. You failed your saving throw. Now the vampire tells you, anytime you see him, don't do anything unless he gives you the word. So you're charmed for that time frame of the charm spell, or charm person spell, excuse me. So you will do as he tells you to do, pretty much. I mean, is within reason, obviously, but you like him, you think he's awesome, so you're going to obey him. So next time the party meets the vampire will be, the party's like, we got you, Sir Vampire. And he's like, well, no, you don't. You don't have me at all. And I do a bad accent as well. You don't have me at all. And a vampire is just like, go get him, Tony. Yeah, the guy's name is Tony. And so this guy's going to turn on his party because the vampire is his buddy now, and things like that can happen. So vampires also have the ability to summon creatures as an ability, aid them, usually 10 to 100 rats or bats. Things that are maybe some wolves, things that will come in 2 to 12 rounds that are basically just there like fodder to confuse the party and get away. Let's see. A vampire can be slain in the following methods that you've probably seen in every trope around the world. Exposed to direct sunlight, kills it in 1 turn. It becomes powerless immediately. A vampire is immersed in running water for 3 rounds. It is killed. The vampire loses 1/3 of its hit points per turn of immersion. If a wooden stake is driven to the vampire's heart, he is killed, but only for so long as the stake remains. To finish the task, you basically have to cut off his head. Remember that scene in I think it was Dracula Dead and Loving It, when they went in the coffin and they jammed the stake into the vampire's heart and all the blood was going everywhere. Every time I think of that, I think of that scene from that Vampire Dead and Loving It with Leslie Nielsen. That was a great movie. Holy water splashed onto a vampire does 1d6 plus 1 points of damage, listed as 2 to 7 hit points of damage per vial, which successfully strikes the monster. So you're throwing it at him as a throwing weapon, boom. So here's the thing we wanted to talk about a little bit before. Any humanoid, which they kind of later this says humanoid, but unfortunately they answer this question a lot later in a Dragon magazine, and it's Dragon magazine number 30. It says it's under the, I believe it's under the tiny hut, but it basically says, it clarifies, note that humanoids and demi-humans cannot become vampires. Even though it says it right here, any human during life becomes a vampire, an appropriate strength vampire under the control of its slayer. This transformation takes place 1 day after the creature is buried, but if and only if the creature is buried. Thus, it is possible to have a vampiric thief, cleric, chaotic evil, vampire form, of course, etc. If the vampire wished to slew the creature itself, the vampire created by itself become a free-willed monster. So, what I wanted to point out is, in Dragon Magazine 30, we have a whole article here that explains more about the vampire itself and gives us a little bit more of a delve into the vampire and how the vampire works, and gives you what a lesser vampire is, because it does talk a little bit about a lesser vampire, which would be the vampires that are created under, and it's actually fully fleshed out in 17 here in this article. Vampires in the dungeon. Hey Dave, why is this fog moving with us? And it'll talk about use your imagination. Use your imagination. As I have said, the list is almost endless. One last practice by the vampire is to take a quick snack from the victim without killing him and then releasing him, or trying to keep him alive, with the intent of prolonged food supply. A vampire's victim does not begin to develop vampire characteristics unless near death, or forced by the vampire to drink the vampire's own blood. See Bram Stoker's Dracula. So that's how we would create a vampire, and it kind of bounces around from the monster manual to these dragon magazines with all these advice and things that you can do to create a vampire. And pretty much they do have a bunch of question answers here in Dragon Magazine number 76. Can a player character become a free will vampire and be played like any other player character? No, a player character who becomes a vampire also becomes a non-player character under the Dungeon Master's control. Otherwise, a character is too powerful and the game balance starts to disappear as the PC vampire vampirizes the countryside. All undead creatures should be NPCs, emphasize the humanocentric nature of the AD&D game system. So, lesser vampires. You can have a lesser vampire. Would you allow that in your campaign? Do you think it would break the game? Quite possibly it will. I don't think a player should play a vampire, though they have added half vampires and lesser vampires in later editions as templates. I think 3E had a template, or maybe 2E might have had, like, in the Splat books, playing vampires. I'm not too familiar with 2E. I remember playing a half vampire in 3E. It was one of those weird templates that you were able to slap onto characters as a race. And it was kind of fun. The Dungeon Master worked with me so we could play a character that was playable for me to have fun, along with it wasn't too overpowering in the group. So take a look at those Dragon magazines and see what you think about vampires. It has some good advice in here, in length here, in depth. In Leomund's Tiny Hut, it goes into a lot of statistics for vampires and the regeneration it talks about vampires and the touch of a vampire, things like that. It's a great article to read on page 7. It starts, and it talks about how the vampire can turn into a bat and how you handle it. And also it talks about about lesser vampires. It only allows kind of, if you go by the rules listed here, which you don't have to, obviously, you can play however you want, but generally it says you can only have a certain amount of vampires in the vampire clan. It only allows 4 under the master vampire, and should a master vampire be slain, the rest of the vampires are set free. Now, if you go by movie tropes and TV shows, and if you watch Supernatural or you watch Buffy and things like that, sometimes when you kill the vampire, it'll kill the rest of them or relieve them from the curse of vampirism. So it really all depends on what you want to do. It's your game. I mean, you could do whatever you want. These are just some things I'm helping supply the whole vampire mythos and abilities here. So hopefully you just tell me how you've used vampires in your game. I'm interested to hear, because I love using vampires. It's just a fun little monster to use, especially as the big bag, because you could really put some horror and fright into your games. And Ravenloft was the basis for a huge campaign in my olden days, and when Brian, one of my DMs from back when I was in high school, he used to run Ravenloft, and we played some 2E briefly. So it was kind of fun to do that. So let me know what you think. Like, comment, and subscribe. Click the bell icon and share the video. So keep it original, keep it old school, and good night, everybody.